The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, he'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
Welcome back to the Forest of Dean again, everybody, where the rain has finally disappeared. It's supposed to now be clear all the way the rest of today now, so hopefully I'm not going to get any more wetter than I have around Wollaston and Alvington, which are the first two episodes you've seen so far in this district. Now this one is made up of two settlements with quite a lot of land in between. I'll cover that in a few moments time. Behind me there you can see the church of one of the two villages in this one. That's the church here at Hewelsfield, which is really only one of two landmarks you can find in this particular village. The other one is a castle mound, which is over the road from where I'm standing. This is the parish of Hewelsfield and Brockweir. Hewelsfield and Brockweir, Higwold's open land. Today in the Forest of Dean, I'm taking you to the Welsh border for the first time on TVI. This is Hewelsfield and Brockweir, which occupies a slice of the forest that touches Wales via the River Wye. There are two villages here, Hewelsfield and Brockweir, and I'm guessing that much was obvious from the name. However, there's more to it than that. Between the two villages are clusters of houses laid out in a piecemeal fashion, occupying the area known as Hewelsfield Common. The two villages couldn't be more unalike if they tried. Hewelsfield is 6 miles away from the town of Colford and occupies a hilly upland area. Brockweir is 2 miles away in a broad valley, through which the River Wye meanders downstream to the Severn Estuary. In this one, we'll be talking about two churches, one Anglican, the other Moravian. We'll also be touching on the life of Flora Clickman, who's buried in the graveyard of one of them. The other church stands opposite a castle mound, simply known as the Motte. There's a shop to talk about, a communal hall with a fabulous backstory to discover, and history regarding shipbuilding to also mention at length. What is a fabulously peaceful rural area divided only by trees and narrow lanes has more in common with Wales than it does England. This is, without a doubt, one of the trickier parishes I've ever covered, but it's all in a day's work for TVI. Let's head deep into the forest and see what's there. We start in Hewelsfield at the parish church of St Mary Magdalene. This has a Norman nave, an early English chancel which was restored in the 19th century, and a north transept enlarged in the 16th. The churchyard is circular in form, which is often taken to suggest a pagan site or perhaps a Celtic foundation. This has been a central part of the community for around 900 years. It's believed to have been built between 1175 and 1200. Not much more than that is really known about this church. However, sometimes less is more. The church was open too, so let's go inside and have a little look around. Well, I must say it's a very clean and very well kept church, and I was a bit surprised actually that it was open, to be honest with you, seeing as this is a place out in the middle of nowhere. How many people come to this church on a regular basis, I wonder? Not very many, not very many. Now, of course, the other thing here in Hewelsfield is the castle mound, which is just over the road from this very building. But before we get to that, we're going to have a little walk around the village itself. It is actually like a little village community. It's not just all about the church and the castle mound. So we're going to take a wander around the lanes in a little circle and end up back at this point outside the church, and then we'll have a look at the castle mound. Here's a bit more history as we wander around Hewelsfield's narrow country lanes. The area was known as Hewoldston in the Anglo-Saxon period. After 1066, the settlement was depopulated to expand the royal forest of Dean, but was reconstituted into a manor in the 12th century. In 1266, that manor was granted to Tintern Abbey, which held it until the dissolution in 1536. It was then given to Henry Somerset, the second Earl of Worcester. He also owned the Abbey Grange at Brockweir. Ancient routes running up from the River Severn at Alvington and Wollaston met at Hewelsfield village and continued to St Breville's, so theoretically, Hewelsfield lay at a crossroads high up in the mountains, unusual for such a small place. Hewelsfield has been a conservation area since 1990. The Hewelsfield Motte is a roughly circular mound thought to be a castle motte dating from the same period as the church, 1175 to 1200. Despite being extensively researched, there's no evidence to indicate when the castle was constructed accurately. Historians reckon it was designed to be either part of the consolidation of the countryside or as a matter of local defence. The site is also known as Hewelsfield Castle Tump, and it's a scheduled monument, first listed in 2012. Evidence is also lacking when it comes to any kind of masonry. There are the remains of a ditch around its base, and other banks and ditches nearby may indicate the existence of a bailey, but this is all theoretical. The presence of the motte is not indicated on Ordnance Survey maps. Around the site of the castle there are extensive earthworks thought to be the remains of a deserted medieval village, possibly connected with the castle. That said, there is another theory that they're the remains of medieval field systems instead. To get to Brockweir, we have to drive through Hewelsfield Common. Before 1842, the former Hewelsfield Parish was made up of 3 parts. In that year, it was expanded to include Hewelsfield Common, which united several detached parts together. In 1935, the parish was further enlarged by adding an arm of Wollaston Parish. Hewelsfield Common starts off as a steep climb, further into the hills, but gradually it begins sloping down to the River Wye. It was occupied and developed in a piecemeal fashion by squatters in the 18th and early 19th centuries. Later in the 19th century, encouraged partly by the opening of the Wye Valley Railway on the Monmouthshire side of the river in 1876, private residents and retired people settled in the area and enlarged the cottages or built new houses. Today it's much the same, it's still spread out all over the place. This lane we're following is one way you can get to Brockweir, but there are others. This is by far the one that's best recommended though. Hewelsfield Common has lots of tight, narrow lanes that often slope downhill at sharp angles, traversing this almost mountain-like terrain. It's not an easy drive, and for a Lincolnshire boy like myself, it's a far cry from all that flat fenland. Mind you, the scenery at times up here can be awesome. As you enter Brockweir, you'll pass the local shop. The Brockweir and Hewelsfield Village Shop and Cafe was set up after the previous local store closed in the year 2000. It's staffed by volunteers and owned and managed by the Brockweir and Hewelsfield Village Shop Association. The site includes a cafe, general store and food outlet, a library kiosk, an art gallery, and even an IT training suite. It also provides basic postal services too. It was all opened by the Prince of Wales in 2004, who described the project as a triumph of community spirit. The project cost around £375,000 and support came from many different sources. The building is traditionally built from local green oak and has photovoltaic roof shingles which produce electricity. Any excess is exported back to the national grid. The building also has a geothermal heating system, drawing energy from the ground underneath the village playing field, which is almost next door. Just down the road is Mackenzie Hall, which has been serving the local community since 1937 as a village hall for both Brockweir and Hewelsfield. It contains a main room, a meeting room, a stage, and a kitchen. To understand the story of how it came to be, we have to go back to 1935. It was in that year that Millicent Mackenzie donated the hall in memory of her husband, John. It was originally a reading room. John Mackenzie was a professor. Okay, so now we are in Brockweir village, and all the time coming down into this place you're heading downhill because in the foot of the valley is the River Wye, and it's also the border between England and Wales. So for the first time on TVI we will be setting foot on Welsh soil. Brockweir is approached as much by water as it is by road. It used to be an isolated community with an independent character. It was once described by the minister of its Moravian church as a city of refuge, centred as it was on beer houses, skittle alleys and cockfighting. In all senses, he meant it was lawless. Nonconformist chapels, a school, the decline of its trade and an influx of outsiders to the area had all helped to temper its character by 1906, when the opening of the bridge over the Wye ended its comparative isolation. Now I am supposed to be walking down a bridleway here, but as you can probably tell, the River Wye has burst its banks and I can't actually access said bridleway. It is there, I promise you, because there are people on it over there, look, but I can't get through this water here because the Wye has definitely come up a bit too much for my liking. You definitely get a good view of Brockweir Bridge from here though. Now we're going to make our way towards that by using the road. I'm going to go back the way I came, which is not the plan, but I can't really help it. I can't walk through this water. There's a swan coming to say hello here. He clearly doesn't know the boundary between river and land at the moment. It's there, I promise you. You're actually on the bridleway there, mate. Right, let's make our way back and up onto the bridge. Industrially, shipbuilding was a thing in Brockweir, taking advantage of the river. Trows and barges were built here from at least the 18th century. From the mid-1820s, seagoing vessels including brigs, schooners and barks began to be built in Brockweir too, using local timber. The ships were not fitted out here. Instead, the hulls were floated down to Chepstow or Bristol. The largest recorded Brockweir-built vessel was the bark Constantine, built in 1847, which weighed 506 tons and was 121 feet long. And this is the river which floated it. Now, Brockweir has been an important crossing point of the River Wye throughout its history. The remains of the weir from which the village gets its name can still be seen as shallows under the impressive Brockweir Bridge. The bridge was built between 1906 and 1908 to replace a ferry which once crossed the Wye to Wales. It's a Grade 2 listed lattice girder bridge that uses methods similar to those used in 19th century railway constructions. Incidentally, the Wye Valley Railway is just over the border into Wales. Prior to the coming of the railways, the River Wye was a busy trading route and Brockweir stands at the most northerly point navigable by large ships. Both the bridge's height and pier spacing reflect Brockweir's former importance as a transshipment port. In 2021, the bridge underwent a £600,000 makeover to replace corroded sections and extend its life. Before the bridge was built, Brockweir was only accessible by water or by the narrow road we've just used, so the presence of this iron monolith dramatically changed the landscape. Now, of course, this river is the boundary between England and Wales at this point, so when you stand in the middle of this bridge, you are on the border of two countries, England and Wales. So yes, technically speaking, right now, with 1 foot here and 1 foot there, I'm standing in two countries at the same time. I've only ever done that once before, between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. Anyway, we are now going to turn around and go back into Brockweir village again. Our next landmark is the church. On the way to the church, we pass an old pub called the George. This has a history that stretches back to 1793, and it changed its name to the New Inn by 1840. In that year, the village had 3 other public houses, all with shipbuilding themed names. They were the Ship, the Severn Trow and the Bristol. The Bristol was called the Sloop in 1844. There was also another beer house called the Spout, north of the village in a row of cottages that was later formed into a single dwelling called Spout House. In 1831, a doctor from Tintern, over the border in Wales, was worried about the spiritual state of the Brockweir villagers as well as their physical health. He wrote about the situation to the Moravian minister in Bristol, Reverend C.F. Ramphler. In 1832, Ramphler held services in Brockweir and received an encouraging response. What followed was the building of the Moravian church on ground given for that purpose by the Duke of Beaufort. Before the church was built, the site, then in the parish of Wollaston, is reported to have been used by the villagers for their rustic sports. These included such things as cockfighting, gambling, dancing and quarrelling. The first minister was Lewis West, who drew congregations of up to 200 people. The interior was modified in 1902 and now contains good Art Nouveau windows and joinery, including a gallery at the entrance end of the church. Now, the graveyard which adjoins the Moravian church also adjoins the River Wye. You can see it behind me here, and of course it's a lot higher than it should be at the moment. Now, while we're in the graveyard, there is somebody we need to talk about, because in here there is buried one Flora Clickman, and if you've never heard of her, well, here's a bit about her. Flora Clickman was a writer who wrote several popular books about her experiences of living in the Wye Valley near Brockweir. Her full name was Emily Flora, but went mostly by her middle name instead. Clickman was the second editor of the Girl's Own paper, but became best known for her Flower Patch series of books of anecdotes, autobiography and nature description. Born in Brixton, London, Clickman was one of 6 children of the German-born Rudolf Clickman and his wife Fanny Warne. The family moved to Sydenham in South London when Flora was in her teens. Flora aspired to be a concert pianist, studying at the Trinity College of Music and then at the Royal College of Organists. However, her battle with arrhythmia put an end to those dreams. Advised to rest, Clickman came to Brockweir to do so before returning to London. This was where her mother's family lived. Her writing began at the age of 21, and by 1895 several of her articles and interviews with musicians had been published to the Windsor Magazine, one of the best-known story periodicals of the time. In 1904, Clickman became the editor of The Foreign Field, a magazine published by the Wesleyan Methodist Missionary Society. By this time, her work had also extended to books on crafts and etiquette, aimed at young girls. The early 1900s was a highly successful period for her, and her work slowly morphed into careers advice for girls, including tips on style and dress, photography competitions and crafts. Long serials became less common, and their place was taken by a larger number of shorter stories, often from distant parts of the world. In 1916, the first of a series of books of written sketches of life in her country cottage at Brockweir was published. In the works, it was simply known as Rosemary Cottage, and it had spectacular views over the River Wye and Tintern Abbey. The book, The Flower Patch Among the Hills, was based on articles originally written for the Girl's Own paper. Clickman would go on to acquire a succession of cottages in the area over the years. In later times, the stories grew to involve her household and the local people, combining nature description, anecdote, autobiography, religion, and humour. In all, 7 Flower Patch books were published, over a period spanning 32 years. Okay, we are pretty much done with Brockweir now. I'm just making my way back up the hill towards where I parked the car. Now, speaking of hills, they were very useful historically, weren't they, for building castles upon. In the next place here in Forest of Dean, we'll be seeing one of those. Indeed we will. I have to admit that whilst we never left England fully in this episode, the Forest of Dean is effectively the English bit of Wales. I might get a bit of heat for that comment, but it's true. In all essence, we are in Wales here. Tomorrow, there's more for you as we continue up the gorgeous Wye Valley to the next one. Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.